Meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 105 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Meeting number 105. Before I begin, I just want to give a brief message on avoiding audio feedback, especially for our witnesses and other members. Please be aware of the following important measures to prevent disruptive and potential harmfully audio feedback. We're asking all participants to keep their earpieces away from their microphones at all times. You might see there's a little circle where you can put your microphone when you're not using it. We've also adjusted the room layout to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These are to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the translators. I do want to say, I see we have some people online, so I want to say that today's meeting is also taking place in a hybrid format. For the members in the room, please raise your hands if you wish to speak. For members on Zoom, if you wish to speak, please use the raised hand function. And if there are any technical issues, please inform me and we can suspend if necessary. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October 17th, the committee is resuming its study of Canadian business in supply chains for global markets. We have with us today the Aluminum Association of Canada, Jean Simard, President and CEO, via video conference, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Michelle Auger, Senior Policy Analyst, National Affairs, Jasmine Gunnett, Vice President, National Affairs, Canadian Trucking Alliance, Stephen Laskowski, President, Canadian Wood Pallet and Container Association, Scott Jeffros, General Manager, Eagle Graphite Corporation, Jamie Deeth, Founder, and the Railway Association of Canada, Laura Smith, Vice President, Public and Government Affairs. Welcome, everyone. You will all have 5 minutes to give us your opening statement. I'll give a little bit of latitude, but please try and keep your remarks as close to 5 minutes as possible. After the opening statements, we'll proceed to our rounds of questions. And Mr. Simard, we will have you go first to make your opening statement. Mute, Mr. Savard. You're on mute. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Thank you very much for having invited us to participate in the work of your committee. I'm going to speak on behalf of the Aluminum Association of Canada, and our ecosystem benefits from economic development centred around its natural resources and its vast potential for renewable energy production. It's a critical material par excellence, and aluminium is also a strategic metal. It's subject to numerous trade pressures between major trading regions. It's often instrumentalized to affect the position of a given country. It's also hyper-exposed to global trade, and it's directly and constantly affected by planetary geopolitics. Canada's low population density relative to its size positions it as a key supplier of high value-added processed resources for its strategic allies. The more densely populated U.S., on the other hand, has favoured the development of its aluminium manufacturing sector. The development of both sectors would not be possible without a deep synergy between the two economies. Canada can take advantage of its abundant energy resources, while the USA can capitalise on its manufacturing process and their critical mass. So Canada accounts for 84% of primary production in North America, with 2.7 millions of tons of exports towards the US, and it generates $12 billion in export values and represents 70% of U.S. imports and 50% of U.S. primary aluminium consumption. I'm now going to share with you, if you allow me to do so, the brief that I submitted to the Canadian government as part of the supply chains consultation back in February this year. This is a document that has been submitted to the committee. My remarks will focus primarily on the transportation aspect. It's essential to ensure a consistent regulatory approach at all levels of government, particularly in the field of commercial goods transportation. This cooperation between the various levels of government and with Canada's trading partners is all the more important given the fact that there have been disruptions to Canadian trade routes in recent years, notably the strikes on the East and West Coast railroads and on the St. Lawrence Seaway. These disruptions have disrupted the trade flows, and combined with the already existing pressure on international trade routes during the pandemic, have actually damaged Canada's reputation as a reliable source within the North American value chains. As previously mentioned, in addition to the importance of the Canada-US border, the industry has faced border issues with Mexico that have affected supply chains and may make North American surface transportation less competitive than import options directly into Mexico. Consistent trade flows are essential for our industry and for the Canadian economy. Given this, commercial goods transportation routes must be considered as an essential service. To address this, the Canadian government should prioritise strengthening the resilience of the logistics network for moving goods across the Canada-US border as part of its regulatory review. The management and protection of future trade routes with high economic potential, and we could even add the Arctic Sea route, why not? It should also be a priority for the government. To complement this policy approach, it would make sense to adopt personalised treatment for importers and exporters based on their trade history. The Aluminium Association of Canada recommends the possibility whereby Canadian economic players who respect all standards and have an exemplary track record could benefit from accelerated or preferential treatment when importing or exporting goods and services. If, for any reason, the flow of goods along a given trade route were to be restricted, Canadian players that have met all these criteria should be given priority access. In response to the growing challenges of our freight sector and given the high value of aluminium shipments, we're also proposing a vital policy change. Drawing inspiration by the successful US model, we advocate mandatory commercial load markings on all freight vehicles in Canada, as well as the creation of a centralised national vehicle registration database. These measures will not only improve the safety and efficiency of our supply chains, but they're also part of our ongoing efforts currently to strengthen the sustainability and resilience of our national freight logistics. We believe that this streamlined approach is essential to maintain Canada's reliability within the North American value chains, and we look forward to a collaborative effort in order to achieve these goals. Regulatory frameworks could also play a vital role in encouraging and supporting experimentation with new environmentally friendly freight transportation options. As part of the drive towards sustainable practices, regulations can be drawn up to encourage the adoption of zero-emission vehicles for freight transport, thereby promoting the reduction of carbon emissions in freight logistics. One innovative approach. Yes? 6
minutes, so I'm going to have to ask you
I'm
to...
done.
Okay, excellent.
To round off, Chair, as we've seen in the recent past that may repeat itself, our privileged access to the US market must be protected and should never be taken for granted.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll now go to Monsieur Guenette and Ms. Auger. Please make your opening statement for up to 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Jasmin Guenette. I'm Vice President of National Affairs with the CFIB. I'm here today with my colleague Michel Auger, a Senior Policy Analyst. We would like to thank the committee for inviting us today. Je vais faire ma présentation en anglais.
I'll be making my presentation in French, but of course I can take your questions in English or French.
CFIB is a nonpartisan organization representing 97,000 small and medium-sized businesses across every industry and region of Canada. Today we will share insight on how best to support the growth of small businesses into domestic and global markets. Small business optimism is currently very low. Every single line of a small business budget is increasing and demand is low. Reducing the tax and regulatory burden will help small businesses address the current increased cost of doing business, will help address growth and sales limitation, and will support SMEs to thrive and contribute more to our trade and supply chain. Trade barriers within Canada must be removed. There are too many regulations that currently hinder the efficient movement and sales of goods because federal and provincial requirements are not aligned. CFIB recommends adopting a policy of mutual recognition to internal trade, which means any regulatory standard in one jurisdiction is recognized in all other jurisdictions without meeting further requirements. Our transportation network, like rails and ports, is at the center of Canada's supply chain system. It needs to remain fluid at all times. However, disruption like strikes at ports and rails can cause significant delays affecting the entire supply chain, and it impacts small business finance and operation. We recommend that the government make port and rail essential services so they remain fully operational at all times. I will now turn it to my colleague, Michelle.
In January of 2024, we conducted a survey on international trade, and we found that in the past 3 years, 31% of SMEs are either exporting goods, services, or both. There's 63% of SMEs who are not involved in exporting and don't plan to do so at all. These rates at which SME export have not changed since the last time we conducted the survey in 2017. Today, a majority of SMEs are exporting primarily to the US, and then that's followed by Europe, UK, and Mexico. Businesses in manufacturing, wholesale, natural resources, agriculture sector have the highest rates of exportation. When looking at our data by size of business, the bigger the business, the higher the likelihood they were involved in exporting. Only 25% of micro-sized businesses are involved in exporting goods, compared to 49% of medium-sized businesses. For businesses involved in exporting, 66% of SMEs indicated that the cost of shipping is the biggest challenge they face. This is also followed closely by the cost of currency and the cost of duties and taxes. Despite these challenges, 54% of SMEs involved in exporting activities indicated that they plan on increasing their export over the next 3 years. While there are some services and programs available to support and assist small businesses in the importing and exporting endeavors, many of them remain underutilized. For example, 76% of SMEs are unaware and have not used the programs available through CanExport. 63% of SMEs are unaware and have not used the programs available through the Trade Commissioner services. And almost half of SMEs are unaware or have not used the programs available through EDC. And 1/3 of SMEs are unaware of the programs available through CBSA. To better support SMEs looking to expand into international markets, the CFIB recommends, among others, to simplify custom duties and regulation, enhance communication and information targeted to SMEs, and also lower border-related fees for smaller firms. This could encourage more SMEs to participate in trade activities. We thank you for your time today, and we look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. And we will now turn to Mr. Laskowski for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and committee members, for having the Canadian Trucking Alliance here today. Briefly about the Alliance, we have about 5,000 members. The way the Alliance works is the 7 major provincial trucking associations form one board and send delegates, very much like the House of Commons, to our board, and we vote and make policy. What I'm about to present to you today is one such policy. In February, the Canadian Trucking Alliance submitted a proposal to the Government of Canada through a regulatory review, the supply chain task force, with regards to issues that could improve both international trade and domestic. I think, though, that we need to understand, too, that a lot of domestic, quote-unquote, moves are generated from international moves and move out of ports, railheads, and from other customers when they come up from the United States. So here's the laundry list. There's a lot here. I won't be able to give you much background in 5 minutes, but happy to take questions. Number one, allow and invest in CBSA to have more sufferance warehouses in Canada. What that means is that we'd be allowed as an industry to clear customs inland as opposed to the border points, and also right now very topical from railheads and marine heads to move inland from CBSA if in potential strikes. With regards to in-transit moves, we will all recall the environmental disaster in British Columbia when we had the landslides and roads closed. Well, the only way that a lot of the goods moved were what's called an in-transit move, where domestic moves, trucks move through the United States back into Canada, like Toronto, Vancouver. The United States, Canada allows such in-transit moves through Canada for the United States. The United States does not allow Canada to move in transit. This would allow what needs to be done. There is some political pressure that needs to be put on Washington, but also investment from CBSA into some electronic investments. With regards to other issues, reporting timeframes at the border, right now the auto sector is required in trucks to report 60 minutes before crossing the border. We'd like to shorten that to 30 minutes. It would greatly help the auto industry and the trucks that move it. More resources at the border for agriculture. Right now, the border is 24/7, except for food and agriculture inspections that work more like what we call traditional banking hours, 9 to 5. That means trucks sit loaded with agricultural product over the weekend or after those hours. Again, when we're spending billions of dollars and applaud the Canadian government for investments like the Gordie Howe Bridge, and such smaller investments would also greatly improve the border. With regards to in Canada, very quickly, cognizant of time, working with the provinces and the federal government to align winter road maintenance standards. The reality is, we all know as consumers, as individuals, when it snows, you move slowly. So do trucks. And when we don't have winter road standards that are aligned between the provinces, those trucks justifiably don't sit. Nobody wants to put truck drivers in danger. If provinces align winter road standards, we can move our trucks quicker and safer. Rest areas for truck drivers. Truck drivers are governed by hours of service. They move loads, whether they're full or not. They need places to rest to move the economy safer. When we don't have those rest areas, they're looking for spots to park. When they don't find those parts, that's more hours wasted in looking for safe spots, as the driver should, as opposed to moving the economy. And last but definitely not least, overweight and overdimensional standards. What that means, folks, is when we have large pieces of equipment or machinery that moves between provinces that are doing goods and services or manufacturing processes, when those standards aren't aligned, those trucks sit. For example, different provinces, believe it or not, have when evening sets, they have a definition, or when the sun rises. And when those definitions aren't aligned, the truck sits until those definitions aligns. So as you can see, we have some significant investments to make, some major policies to make, and then just some common sense moves to make where we can make our industry and our economy far more competitive. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, and thanks for being on time. We'll now turn to Mr. Jeff Ross. Please go ahead and make a statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to you all. It's an honor to be here before the Standing Committee on International Trade. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak about our organization and the vital role of wood packaging in both domestic and global supply chains and markets. As the General Manager of the Canadian Wood Pallet and Container Association, or CWPCA, I'm here to represent the views and perspectives of the wood packaging industry. We're founded in 1968, and the CWPCA was built on strong professional relationships with members, the private sector, and respective government departments tasked with regulating our industry. The CWPCA has been the leading voice in Canada for the wood packaging industry since its inception, and our core objective is to promote the use of wood packaging and protect Canadian interests on the global stage while supporting our members by sharing tools and information that protect and sustain the wood packaging industry. We have and continue to successfully do this by connecting our members to relevant and noteworthy industry-related information at the regional, national, and international levels. Since our creation, we've developed a compelling voice on domestic and international matters related to wood packaging, including supporting industry practices within regulatory affairs, promoting the sustainable nature of our business and products. We act as a conduit for the dissemination of industry news and issues, both domestic and international, and maintain strong relationships with sister associations, prominent industry representatives around the world via the Global Wood Packaging Forum. The CWPCA has over 160 members across the country, almost 24 more international members. Our sector generates just over $1 billion in sales annually and happens to provide one of the most critical elements which our supply chain is based around. And while our sales figures of $1 billion may not be incredibly large in comparison to some, the actual value of goods that ship on and in wood packaging is astounding. Canada's international trade supply chain cannot properly function without wood packaging, and this is why it's crucial to sufficiently support the industry by creating an environment that allows it to succeed and function effectively. The CWPCA as an industry organization is quite unique in the fact that we also act as an alternate service delivery organization on behalf of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Our purpose in this role is to oversee facilities registered in the Canadian Heat-Treated Wood Product Certification Program who are engaged in the manufacture of wood packaging that is certified under the global ISPM 15 program. The ISPM 15 program, for those who aren't aware, is a phytosanitary certification program which allows wood packaging to continue to be used in international trade and mitigates the risk associated with invasive forest pests which sometimes move via forest products in trade. In addition to our connection to our core membership, acting in this role also keeps us involved with in excess of 325 more Canadian companies who manufacture certified wood packaging for export. This important role supports Canadian exporters and ensures that our wood packaging products meet the highest phytosanitary standards possible. This role also enables our participation in Canadian task groups, such as the Canadian Forest Phytosanitary Working Group, which works to ensure global market access for our forest products, the Canadian Forest Products Advisory Committee, which works on plant health issues and domestic regulatory programs. As well, we participate internationally in working groups spearheaded by the North American Plant Protection Organization and the International Plant Protection Convention. As we in Canada return to somewhat more normal times post-pandemic, Canada's wood packaging companies are slightly less consumed by strained operational demands. However, all things, as we know, are cyclical, and we know that we could be called upon at a moment's notice to ramp up production to meet the needs of the supply chain as we experienced during our COVID years. While many wood packaging companies were very profitable during the pandemic definitely exposed some cracks in our industry's armor. And if unaddressed, these weaknesses can and will exacerbate issues caused by future disruptions. With this in mind, we ask the Canadian government to learn from these experiences and recognize how close we as an industry came to not being able to meet the demands of our supply chain for several years. We feel the time is now for the Canadian government to invest in the wood packaging sector, which can also be seen as an investment in supply chain stability and an investment in the future. Thus, in our most recent pre-budget submissions, we have requested a specialized pool of funds specifically be earmarked for the wood packaging sector in order to support our domestic and export supply chains. We have explored funding at the regional and provincial levels, but we feel that a federal program would benefit us most. We ask that a pool of funds in the amount of $30 million or $10 million a year over 3 years be set aside in a special purpose account for investment into the wood packaging sector. We need our supply chains to function properly for the Canadian economy to thrive and to boost the competitiveness of Canadian businesses. A healthy and robust wood packaging sector provides a solid foundation to support supply chains, and investment in the wood packaging sector is an essential element needed to help us achieve this. So thank you again for the opportunity to appear before this committee, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you very much. Hear from Mr. Deeth, the founder of Eagle Graphite Corporation.
Honourable Chair and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to share insights that I hope will prove useful in shaping future policy. My name is Jamie Deeth. I have been the founder and CEO of Eagle Graphite for 17 years. I'm very fortunate to have had a professional career of over 30 years, rich in experiences in various countries and in a range of fields, including financial markets, medical equipment, and mining. In the mining field, Eagle Graphite's primary focus has been a graphite mine in southeastern British Columbia. On paper, this project is endowed with a number of significant advantages. It's environmentally pristine, permitted for production, and has a proven track record of producing high-quality graphite. Graphite itself has been on critical minerals list globally for many years, and it is critically important to both traditional industries and emerging technologies crucial for the energy transition. Most notably, graphite is an essential ingredient in electric vehicle batteries, and China has a monopoly on supply. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge, and this is shared amongst everyone in the critical minerals field, has been our inability to fund an objectively good project. And over time, this inability to fund the project has taken its toll and has resulted in our recently losing the entire project to a vulture capitalist. And this outcome is all too common in critical minerals. Each failure has its own specific twists, but the common thread is the lack of capital. I cannot name a single critical minerals mining project in Canada that has achieved the goal of scale production in this century, nor even one that has even secured the necessary financing to do so. The alarm bells around critical mineral supplies have been ringing for years. We all seem to want a meaningful reduction in our reliance on adversaries, yet somehow the market is unable to deliver. As Canadians, we want to play a valuable role in the Western supply chain, but we've been unable to start the ball rolling on the basic supply of minerals. The capital simply isn't appearing. In my view, the lack of capital arises because there exists too much risk in the relationship between producers and suppliers. Individual mining projects are inherently risky. Projects may fall short on quality, fail to meet production targets, miss deadlines, and frequently fail to achieve any production at all. For most end users, capitalizing such a production is well outside their comfort zone. After all, they aren't miners, and there is already a well-established China-centric supply chain. Even the signing of binding agreements to purchase materials from an aspiring project comes with the risk of being left high and dry if the project fails. On the other hand, more traditional capital providers, such as mine investment funds, might be comfortable with the project, but they struggle with the uncertainties of a future market price. If the users of the minerals won't commit to buying them, there is deep uncertainty about whether a mine that takes 5 years and huge dollars to ramp up will ever be economically sustainable. This commitment gap is the biggest barrier to Canada's objective of playing a meaningful role in these supply chains. I see no realistic scenario in which existing market structures can overcome this problem without help. To address the capitalization gap, I propose a critical mineral stabilization reserve. Here's how it could work. For each critical mineral, policymakers determine a strategic quantity to stockpile. For instance, we could aim for a supply of lithium carbonate sufficient to meet North American demand for 6 months. For sake of argument, that might be 100,000 tons. Over the course of 2 to 3 years, reserve managers gradually acquire the lithium to build the reserve, emphasizing a few key features. First, stockpiles are acquired through transparent and competitive auctions that are held quarterly. Domestic producers get preferred terms. They still have to compete, but substantial incentives exist to favor the domestic sources over the non-domestic ones. The domestic sources will also enjoy an additional benefit of being able to forge long-term contracts with the reserve for their future production. Even as this reserve is being ramped up, a portion of the reserve is opened up to industrial consumers of minerals. Again, there are some key aspects. As in the auctions to acquire minerals, there are transparent and competitive auctions to sell the minerals to the consumers at market rates. The domestic consumers, they also have to compete to purchase those minerals, but they get to do so on preferred terms. And they also have access to the stockpile through long-term contracts. After the reserve reaches its target size, it continues to function as a clearinghouse, but also as a stabilization mechanism. Stabilization occurs by allowing the reserve to sell a little more when prices go up and to buy a little more when prices go down. So here's how everyone benefits. The consumers of minerals benefit because transacting with the reserve eliminates the risk to any one supplier. Domestic consumers committing to Canada gain further through preferred access provisions. The producers also benefit because the reserve is a secure buyer for their goods. Domestic producers also gain a huge advantage in being able to set up long-term stable contracts. They can take these contracts to mine financiers who now see a much improved financial certainty for their investments. The benefit for Canada as a whole is a system that provides incentive for the producers and consumers to come to Canada and to remain tied to Canada for the long term. If the end goal is a vibrant and prosperous energy transition ecosystem in Canada, this will go a long way. Perhaps most attractive
I'm gonna have to interrupt there because we're well over time, and we'll get to your questions.
I have less than 1 minute if you'll indulge me.
We're already at almost 6 minutes,
Very good.
so I'm going to apologize.
Okay.
Laura Smith from the Railway Association of Canada for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Every year, Canada's freight railways move $380 billion worth of goods, including half of Canada's exports. The Canadian freight rail network is world-class by any objective measure. Canada's railways provide the highest safety performance in North America, industry-leading environmental innovation, and strong service. Depuis les changements apportés à la loi sur les transports nationaux en 1987,
Since the changes to the National Transportation Act in 1987, rail productivity has more than quadrupled. The average wage for railway workers is about to triple, and rail fares have risen at about half the rate of inflation. Today, Canada's freight fares are on average the lowest amongst the major market economies, including the US.
use grain as an example. Farmers pay far more to truck and elevate a ton of grain less than 100 kilometers than it costs the grain company to move that grain 1,500 kilometers by rail from prairie to tidewater. Rail is the greenest mode of ground transportation, and railways are 3 to 4 times more fuel efficient than trucks. Over 35,000 Canadian railroaders work around the clock in some of the harshest weather to bring Canadian goods safely and sustainably to global markets. Canada was built by rail, and railways, both passenger and freight, continue to help build and develop this country. While my remarks today are focused on freight, I'd like to underline the critical role of passenger railways in economic and social development. As this committee considers ways to support the growth of Canadian businesses, the committee should encourage a policy and regulatory framework that allows the Canadian rail network to remain world-class. Extended regulated interswitching, resurrected last year, is a federal policy that puts Canadian jobs and investment at risk. The policy can slow down supply chains and raise costs for Canadian exporters, importers, and consumers. Under extended interswitching, U.S. railways can solicit Canadian traffic at below-market regulated rates without any reciprocity for CN and CPKC to do the same in the U.S. That means fewer available carloads for Canadian railroaders to move across Canada. It may also mean less available work for port workers if shipments end up in Seattle rather than Vancouver, for example. These are good-paying union jobs, and that's why Canada's rail unions oppose extended interswitching. Extended interswitching has been tried before, and it failed. Informed by David Emerson's Canada Transportation Act review panel and substantial evidence, Transport Canada concluded in 2017 that extended interswitching was, quote, having unintended consequences on the competitiveness of our railways vis-a-vis the U.S. railways. Then Minister Marc Garneau did not just sunset extended interswitching at that time, he replaced it with long-haul interswitching, a remedy which today still exists, available to shippers up to 1,200 kilometers. What those advocating for extended interswitching want is to use government policy to secure an unfair advantage at the expense of all other users of the rail network. Extended interswitching hurts Canadian supply chains, workers, consumers, Canadian business, relying on efficient rail service to remain competitive, and it must be immediately repealed. Short-line railways are also incredibly important links in the supply chain and connect communities and business to global markets. 1 in 5 carloads starts on a short line in Canada, and short lines need predictable government funding mechanisms to remain viable alternatives to trucking. Unlike the U.S., there is no dedicated support mechanism for short-line railways at any level in most provinces, despite their outsized impacts. Multiple House committees have recommended greater short-line support, and we respectfully request this committee to do the same. Monsieur le Président, le Canada a besoin plus d'investissement.
Mr. Chair, Canada needs more investment, not less, and Canada should be encouraging the flow of trade, not creating barriers. And the federal government should be taking action to address supply chain challenges, such as the inability to load grain onto ships when it's raining in the port of Vancouver. And an important point at the moment, there's also the question of labour stability.
Over 10 years, railways have invested more than $21.5 billion to enhance the fluidity and resilience of Canada's rail network. Railways are enabling their customers and the economy to grow. The government should help enable this positive growth story for Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to our first round of questions, and that will be Mr. Martel for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here today. I've got a question for Mr. Sima. You are the president of the Aluminium Association of Canada, and I always wonder, and perhaps you could answer me, who do you actually represent? Do you represent the producers or the whole of the aluminium industry in Canada? Thank you, Mr. Martel. We represent in our association the three big primary producers, Alcoa, Rio Tinto and Alouette. And there's 8 smelters in Quebec, and there's 1 in Kitimat in BC. We've often heard that SMEs and processors would like to be able to purchase Canadian aluminium. Often, well, you sell, of course, to producers, but often they find it hard to procure Canadian aluminium. It's not there when they want to buy it. Is that something that you're aware of? For our Canadian SMEs and our Canadian processors, they're not able to get their hands on Canadian aluminium, often obliged to turn elsewhere. Well, I'm astonished to hear that Canadian metal goes through the whole of North America, and a great deal of our metal goes down to the US. We provide contracts and which are sealed over time for supply chains, whether it's in the transport sector or for packaging. So it's certain it's part of the metal that's already dedicated to certain clientele, but there is other aluminium that's available here in Canada and in Quebec. Sometimes it's a question of volume or delivery or capacity to absorb the metal when it's ready to be delivered. There's lots of different constraints that may exist in these situations if we're talking about small volumes, but there is metal that's available for SMEs in Quebec, amongst others, who are doing processing. Well, Mr. Sima, often we hear concerns about aluminium because we produce more with less employees. We innovate a great deal in this sector, as you know. Do you fear for future jobs in aluminium because we're going to need less and less people? Not at all. Quite the contrary is the answer. We're not different from the other sectors. We're also in a full employment situation in Quebec and Canada, even more so out in the regions. And if we look at the labour statistics, in the future there's going to be less and less people available for the same jobs. So the industry is working very hard to actually maintain its operations and its production capacity for the decades to come. So that means in our sector and in other sectors, we have to increase automation where it's possible. We're starting to use more and more AI. We're not different from what's happening in China or in the Middle East or closer to us in Europe or in the US. We don't have any choice. We have to modernize our ways of doing things. But this is not done to the detriment of jobs. The two are migrating together. Mr. Martel, someone who's working as an operator in a smelter in 10 years' time, will have a completely different training profile from the person who's there at the moment. But all of that will be done, phased in over time. Thank you, Mr. Simel. And I'm turning to Mr. Guinnett. Now, when it comes to our SMEs, our Canadian businesses, what is their biggest challenge when they want to reach and be present on an international market? Please go ahead. Well, If you don't mind, I'm going to answer in English. I've worked a great deal on this.
This is the fact that they're not experts in custom procedures and filling out all the documentations and border transaction and having access to agents all contribute to the issues that they experience at the borders. You know, there's a lot of penalties, and what we've been saying to CBSA for years is rather than penalizing our small businesses is taking an education-first approach to trade because they're not experts in custom procedures.
Merci. J'ai une autre question, oui. 30 secondes. Hein?
Thank you. I've got another question, 30 seconds. So for Ms. Smith? Yes, I've got another minute. So what are the biggest challenges for our railway services currently? What is the biggest challenge, do you think?
I think our railways right now are facing an incredible amount of regulation, stacking regulations, and investment is what moves supply chains rather than prescriptive regulation. So the railways feel that they need a policy and regulatory framework that would encourage investment and allow them to grow along with their shippers into global markets.
Peut-être que c'est des idées que je me fais.
Perhaps these are just my own ideas, but I've already heard that when you transport goods, you give priority to certain sectors over others. And there's other sectors that are a second or third priority. Is that true? Do you promote certain sectors more than others when it comes to your freight railroad cars more than others, or does it depend on the demands that come in?
Absolutely. It depends on the demand that comes in. Our freight railways have a common carrier obligation, and they move what's presented to them. They also ensure a system approach to ensure that their cars are moving most efficiently to serve their customers at 3 coasts. And so productivity gains in the rail industry have been incredible in the last decades. At this point, as we measure them of revenue ton miles per employee, we've improved again over decades. So there's no preference. The railways will move their customers' goods as presented to them on the 3 coasts in Canada as well as the U.S.
That's CIIT. Mr. Sidhu for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here today and sharing your important feedback to us. You know, having spent 13 years in international trade prior to my career in politics, I understand the importance of supply chain resiliency and continuing to invest in our infrastructure to allow for more trade to flow as we build out the economy. One of the infrastructure projects that always comes to my attention in my riding with the trucking community is the new Gordie Howe Bridge. It's the port of entry at Windsor, the busiest border in our country. And, you know, the Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor has done a recent study that estimates the new route will include and save truckers over 800,000 hours, translating into billions of dollars in savings. And it means that truck drivers in my riding can get home to their families quicker. Mr. Laskowski, you mentioned in your opening statement the Gordie Howe Bridge, and I'm wondering if you can provide more insights into what this bridge would mean to your members.
Well, I think, as we've said for a number of years, it's probably the most important investment to the international trade in decades, the building of the Gordie Howe Bridge. And in essence, what you've hit on is key, is the time savings. And prior to the construction of this bridge and when it's operational, all the trucks had to literally go through the downtown streets of Windsor. And that meant stoplight after stoplight and queuing after queuing. That goes away with the Gordie Howe Bridge. And also with the Gordie Howe Bridge comes the opportunity for designers and working with the trucking industry, which they have, to design plazas for modern trade. And so we are going to build a modern gateway to our largest trading partner. And it's a great example of how to invest into international trade.
No, and it's a spectacular bridge to look at how the construction is going. I was in Detroit a few months ago to have a look, and I know many of the truckers in Brampton are looking forward to it. You mentioned the importance of rest stops. This is something that comes up a lot with my constituents. You know, they talk about the infrastructure down the I-75 in the U.S. or the I-90, I-95. How are those discussions going with the province of Ontario? Because I know it's along the routes that they control.
The province is under the previous Minister Mulroney for transport has made a number of significant investments in truck rest areas. The rest of the provinces are continuing to keep up with that, but the reality is we are decades behind across Canada in all provinces, and the reality is that needs to be corrected. And so we are calling on all provinces and the federal government to address that, because the reality is that these rest stops are critical for the safety of our drivers and, quite frankly, for their respect. This is where they sleep. This is where they eat and shower. And these investments need to be made. You know, many drivers will tell you that during the COVID crisis, they were seen as heroes. And now I think it's time for public policy and the legislatures across Canada and here in Ottawa to show them that respect back by investing in their workplace.
No, absolutely, and they are heroes. You know, during the pandemic, they stepped up in huge numbers and continued to bring in the goods that we needed to rely on. And so I think it's important that we continue to advocate to the provinces, and I'll continue doing that as well with my provincial counterparts to ensure they make those investments. Turning to the CFIB, you mentioned the importance of more awareness to grow trade in Canada. You know, the Indo-Pacific strategy, fastest growing region in the world. I'm noticing in my role as a parliamentary secretary for international trade is a lot of exporters are looking to that region. They want to expand into that region. Is CFIB doing internal workshops, information sessions for your members so they can tap into this market?
Yeah, I mean, we have been working closely with CBSA in terms of trying to educate them on the CARM portal. When it comes specifically into investing in certain markets, there's always opportunities for us to host webinars and educate our members. That's certainly not something currently on our radar at the time, but educating our members on the programs that exist from the federal level is certainly something that we continue to do, and we try to help and support the government, especially when it comes to the CAN export and some of the other programs available through EDC for financing. Those are certainly programs that we see some value in, but I think the government also needs to do their part in making sure that small businesses have access to those programs.
No, absolutely, and I know our Trade Commissioner Services is doing a wonderful job. Part of my role is to make sure that's expanded and more businesses are able to reach those services. You know, I sat down with the Brampton Board of Trade and Trade Commissioner Services recently to highlight what they can offer, and definitely for the Canadians that are watching, if your product is market ready and you're ready to export, the Trade Commissioner Services have offices across the country that can help both your members to export into this new region. I know there's many fast-growing opportunities, and Minister Ng is taking trade delegations to the region, you know, quite frequently, and that's important as well. So follow the Trade Commissioner website as well. I think that's a very important resource to have. You mentioned CARM. That's something that we've been working on as a committee here and raising a lot of awareness. And so, you know, it's a very important program that's been going on for over 10 years. You know, more than actually close to 15 years, and we'll get through that one. But I think it's important that we recognize the value in these new markets in the Indo-Pacific because there's huge opportunities there. But thank you.
Unfortunately, that's the time, so perhaps you can get to that at another point. We'll now go to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors...
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for the Aluminum Association of Canada. Thank you for being here, Mr. Sima. In a press release that came out in March 2023, you said there should be a North American Aluminum Trade Committee set up in particular to try and reduce certain distortions in North America because of unfair trade practices in the aluminum sector. That's the end of citation. So what are these unfair practices as such? Thank you very much for that question. First of all, The press release came out after a meeting that was held between the three associations in Mexico, Canada, and US that worked together to try and consolidate the aluminum market within the CUSMA space. And one of the elements that we're constantly working on is to ensure that metal that does not respect market rules should not be able to come over one of the borders of the three signatory countries. In the past, we've seen that that type of situation has occurred in Mexico. So there was metal that came into Mexico that was then reprocessed and ended up on the North American market. That's not a situation that we've seen in Canada. We're not a destination market. Rather, we're a producer market that exports towards the US. But Mexico, traditionally speaking, was an entry point for metal coming in from China or from Russia that was discounted, where we reduced the price so that it could then enter the American market. Thank you for that specific detail. You also talked about reinforcing regional surveillance of aluminum imports, and you also underlined that the US and Canada have set up new and improved surveillance programs for import surveillance, but Mexico hasn't done this for aluminum, so I imagine that links up with what you've just talked about. So what are the impacts of the fact that the Mexican government is not actually honouring its commitments in favour of this type of surveillance system, and why are they resisting that? That's a very good question. The answer is a very complicated one. We had a meeting in Ottawa just a few months ago. That's the second meeting in this series of trilateral meetings, and we were there with our Mexican counterparts. Mexican authorities were there, as well as the Canadians and the US counterparts, and we dealt with this situation. The response from Mexico is that the data is collected by the Mexican government, but it's not rendered publicly accessible because of something that occurred over the last few years. What does that actually mean? That means that if we look at the Mexican statistics on metal imports, and when we try and look at the metal that's coming in from Russia or from China since 2021, that type of data is no longer visible. It's just in the category other or etc. So that means that we no longer have visibility on this type of metal. We know very well that it has come over the Mexican border in different forms back then. So Canada and the US are requiring that Mexico should set up a system similar to what Canada developed back in 2019 in a very robust way here, so that we could track exactly what's coming in and the origin of this and who was the actual importer, as well as the value of this metal entering Canada. Mexico responded on the principle that they're going to try and deliver the goods, so to speak, on this system. I will believe it when we see it. The other element is that we're asking for a North American committee to be set up on aluminum trade between the three countries and the three industrial associations, so that we can have a space to have discussions and tackle these trade issues between the three countries.
OK, en une minute, alors.
So I've got one more minute. We also know that there's a presidential election coming up in the US this year, and there's one of the candidates, the probable Republican candidate, who said today, well, we saw it in the newspapers today, that he asked the big oil firms to give him $1 billion for his campaign, and he said that in turn that he would revoke lots of tens of decisions that have been taken by Joe Biden when it comes to climate change and the environment. So we're also talking about measures for electric vehicles and restrictions on drilling and wind farms. So aluminum is very much linked to decarbonisation and electrification of transport. So it's more of a rhetorical question, perhaps. Are you rather afraid when you hear that type of announcement? Yes, certainly with that announcement and others that we've heard in the past about imposing tariffs once again. So it creates a very volatile political context, and that's very harmful when it comes to our investments in aluminium production on this side of the border and probably on the other side as well. It's not a good business climate for us.
We'll now turn to our last round for this round one. Ms. Blaney for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, and I thank all the witnesses for being here today with us to talk about this really important issue. I'm going to talk with Mr. Deeth. I have a few questions. I was really saddened to hear some of what you had to share today, and really compelled by what you talked about in terms of critical minerals, and that we are in a process, hopefully more and more, of moving towards an energy transition. And right now, China does have the monopoly. And as we look at our commitments in this country, and as we want to look at growing our economy, that is something we should be taking seriously. As we know, there are more and more other countries that are looking to buy these resources ethically. So you talked a lot about the fact that there's just not the capital appearing. And I know that across Canada, we're seeing a lot of provincial and federal governments subsidize the fossil fuel industry significantly still. We know that Canada has spent $35 billion on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which is another example of a lot of resources given to the fossil fuel industry. I'm just wondering if you could share from your perspective around those critical minerals, what would really help Canada create a stronger domestic green energy supply chain that could quickly probably become international?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. My belief is that Canada, as most of the West is as well, we're coming from very far behind in the development of the industries and the ecosystems related to electric vehicles and the energy transition more generally. This means that not only is it difficult to set up an ecosystem, but we're competing with ecosystems that are already largely fully developed in other parts of the world. This makes it doubly difficult to make up for lost time. And the reality is the capital scarcity has been a couple of, partly that reason, but also I would say there's a lot of uncertainty as to government policy going forward, right? There's going to be a lack of commitment if those who have the capital and want to deploy the capital have no certainty as to where policy is going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years' time.
Well, you also talked about the stabilization of the critical minerals plan, and I really enjoyed hearing about your idea about stockpiling those materials. And I think what is interesting to me and what I want to understand a little bit better is what would that stabilization do for businesses that are growing within Canada to have this type of model moving forward? And specifically, because it's a particular passion of mine, what would be the impact on small, remote communities? Because when I look at the economy in Canada, one of the things that does concern me is that we're not looking at strong motivation to see transition happening in those smaller communities. And we've lived through boom and bust in those communities again and again, and we really do need to diversify and stabilize. So I'm just wondering, with this model that you presented, how would that benefit those types of communities?
Certainly any community that's involved in the energy transition, doing something that stabilizes both availability and prices within the markets should go a long way to give certainty to those who need to do the planning for those communities. And that should help with an environment that will allow everyone in the supply chain, down to the very end users at those communities, all the way up the supply chain to those who need to produce the materials. It gives them a sense of certainty that they understand where things are going, and that when there will always be times when there's a bit of a wild ride in some of these markets, especially with the pace at which things are changing, that there at least is some cushioning and that there's some advantage to those who make those commitments domestically.
So I appreciate that. And I know that in February of 2021, you were witness before the National Resource Committee. And as part of your testimony, you said, quote, "There is a renewed sense of urgency for secure, localized, and diversified supply chains across all industries, but especially those critical to defense and otherwise foundational to the economy. If it has finally dawned on us and our allies collectively that some parts of the economy need a reliable underpinning of steady supply. So it's been 3 years since you made that comment. Do you see any increased action or any results?
The biggest single event was probably the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. It has gone some way, but even now, in recent days, we're seeing that they are backing off from some of the commitments to shore up the security of supply chains. Graphite, in particular, has been now Chinese graphite has been exempted for a couple of extra years, and this actually speaks to the issue I mentioned earlier that that without some consistency of government policy. Market players, capital providers will second guess that policy and say, well, gosh, if there's been another 2 years that we have to, just live off Chinese supply, well, what's to say that in 2 years' time we won't get another 2 years and another 2 years after that? So a lot of these decisions, although on balance things have sort of gradually moved the right way, I would say not nearly at the sort of pace that's required if we want to achieve anything, within a reasonable time frame of say 10 years.
Thank you for that. I know my time is almost up,
Yeah,
so I'll let it go. Thank
15 seconds. Thank you, Ms. Blaney. Our second round of questioning, and from the Conservative Party, Mr. Jeanneroux for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for coming here on a Thursday afternoon. Just a quick question. I hope to get to you, Ms. Smith, but before I do. Just a quick question to you, Mr. Jeffros. There was a supply chain task force report that was developed. It was October of 2 years ago, and it's I guess a focal point of a lot of the study that we've had here in front of us. Just want to the way that you talked about the impact of the Wood Pallet and Container Association being quite instrumental in the supply chain. Just curious if you were consulted on this report.
Thank you, Mr. Jeanneroux. No, we were not consulted, and we did, in fact, send correspondence back to the committee about the lack of consultation in the document and several findings that we did encounter there that seemed rather erroneous. It appeared that the committee looked to some of the largest, what we call pallet pooling companies, for their information, as opposed to looking to what we would call the whitewood sector, which are the small ma-and-pa shops around the country that really are the backbone of the industry.
So that was one instance. Were there other? You mentioned there's a few parts of the report.
Yeah, sorry, it's been quite a while since I've gone through the document, so I would want to review again just to point out I do have notes on it at home.
For sure. When you get home, send us an email, and happy to hear more of those. I know you said you sent it to the committee before, but just want to make sure that it gets incorporated as part of this study.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, really appreciated your testimony, and do want to talk to you, I guess, a little bit about interswitching. You discussed it again. We've had some conversation here at committee over the years. I know they've had it over on the agriculture side over the years, and I think there's the ability to shed some light on it from your perspective. I think would be helpful if we got into a bit more of it. So, hoping that you can explain the impact of interswitching on the workforce and workers in particular.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So interswitching is the transfer of goods between two railways. Very common practice, done now for really since railways existed pretty well. The problem with extended interswitching is that the kilometer limits, grew from 30 now to 160 kilometers. And it's predominantly used, or the policy covers the 3 prairie provinces. What that means is the 160 kilometers now extends and enables a U.S. railroad to have access to Canadian traffic into Canada, whereas they wouldn't be able to on an even. So it's created an uneven playing field for that U.S. player to be able to take traffic from both CN and CP during this pilot program, which started in September of 23 in the budget then, and it will. It's a pilot program that is meant to sunset in March of 25. What it would mean is at a below market rate, at a cost rate, the Canadian railroad would have to pass the traffic off to a U.S. railroad, and they would take it the rest of the way. And so in the case of grain, quite likely it would go to the port, it would likely go to Tacoma, Seattle, and therefore it wouldn't go to our Canadian port and be shipped out. This would affect investment from our railroads. It would affect the workers that obviously do that traffic, do that work, and potentially also the capacity at the port will be affected because now it will be handled by a U.S. port and not a Canadian port. So it's not just the railways, it's very much a downstream effect as well.
I guess you're hit on some of the competitiveness implications there. You mentioned grain. Are there others that we should be concerned of? I think only about 30 seconds left. But
grain is the predominant one because it is focused on the three prairie provinces. So Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. So yes, there could be other commodities that are affected, and I could perhaps provide your office with a more complete answer on that.
Out of this, Chair. Am I done?
And that's time. So thank you, Mr. Jenner. Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes. Mr. Sheehan, we can't hear you, and we didn't get a chance to test your headset before the committee began. Maybe check to see if you're on mute. If not, unplug and plug back in your headset. Okay.
Check one. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Thank you. Sorry. Good advice, Mr. Chair. I unplugged and plugged back in. Keeping with the Rail Association, recently the federal government had made an announcement through the National Trade Corridor funding in the tune of $10.5 million that leveraged just over $30 million in funding from the private sector and the province for a rail line between Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury. The owner was Genesee, Wyoming. It operates as Huron Central in the area. And we worked quite a bit with the Rail Association, and I noted in your presentation talking a bit about, the different rail. But this one was a short line. And so the short line rail lines are usually under the purview of provinces and territories. But, at this particular time, through the National Trade Corridor funding, this round, we were able to fund the short line railway. And it provides absolutely important services because without it, it would be like putting 30,000 transports on the road in a year. Not just between Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury, because you're not going to stop and reload them onto a train and then send them to Montreal or Toronto, but rather those transports would probably continue. So it was a safety issue, it was a carbon issue, but it was an operating economic issue. How important is the National Trade Corridor funding to the rail industry, to the supply chains? And how important was it to sort of change the criteria to make it more extensive?
I can't speak to the exact example that you're asking in terms of the Huron Central, but I know in general for short lines, the biggest problems are that these are often very small businesses that are operating infrastructure that are spun off from the class ones, and therefore some of the lines that they inherit and they're attempting to optimize and provide service to these rural and regional areas. They're inheriting infrastructure that needs a lot of work right from the beginning, and so without having financial instruments that can help them be able to have the ability to plan and have that money available to them is critical. So the predictability of it, having it administratively simple, which we've heard from other speakers, is also very key and very fair. So we were disappointed in the budget that there wasn't more National Trade Corridor money, because it is critical for those in the supply chain to make these large investments when it's needed. So having dedicated funding mechanisms remains a real concern for the industry.
Thank you for that. And just keeping on that, I think that's a perfect example. And here's where lies one of the issues, I think, in the supply chain. And it was brought to my attention. I've been working on this rail file for quite a while. I kind of inherited that when I became an MP, and was explained to me pretty succinctly. The shipping industry, nobody owns the oceans or the Great Lakes per se. Airline industry, no one owns the air, but the rail lines are owned by rail companies. And here's where the quagmire is. That line was owned by CN, and they allowed it to degenerate into a place where they quite frankly didn't want to operate it. They didn't want to invest in it. And, it was one of them, like, they don't own the rail line. This company wants to operate on it. And they were all doing this. What will the rail industry and how can the rail industry take a little bit of ownership on the infrastructure that they do own? It's very important. And Laura, I comment on this particularly because we can bring that stuff up to a level where freight can operate on it. However, as you've made in your remarks, we want to see more passenger rail. Passenger rail needs a newer level, a bigger level of rail lines doing, so that they can operate at a speed between, for example, Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie that would allow for passenger rail, because freight operates on a level that is lower and a lower speed. But if you want to get passenger rail, you're going to have to see, the infrastructure on the rail lines that are privately owned picked up. Is there an interest by the rail carriers? Because I've heard that they don't want to be in passenger rail. They only want to do freight. So if you could please just explain to the committee what I've heard over the last few years and what exactly the rail industry is doing about passenger rail.
As an association, our members, we advocate for dedicated track for passenger rail in order to accommodate the growth that's needed and predicted, forecast for both freight and passenger. We feel that it's the best way to go to assure that for the future-proof it, to be able to take advantage of the greenhouse reductions, gas reductions that we can have from rail, to take advantage of the environmental advantages that rail offers. And so we believe that the RAC believes that dedicated track is the way to go for passenger rail.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope to see more passenger rail, and just not through the major corridors.
That's time, Mr. Sheehan. We're
thank you
well
very much.
Well over. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Chair.
We'll now turn to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Sima. Let's continue with our discussion. We know that the US and Mexico have both been victims of a question of transshipment problems with aluminum, where there were massive volumes of Chinese billets that were disguised as different products to avoid hundreds of thousands of customs duties payments. Do you think that Canada's being vigilant enough and is firmly applying the global rules in this sector that exist? Well, we do recall that file. It was a Chinese billionaire, in fact, who used aluminum to try and exit his fortune from China. And there was aluminum that was found in Mexican desert, and then it was repatriated back to Vietnam. We're talking about billions of dollars involved. We're not in that type of scenario here in Canada. First of all, we've got a very robust system when it comes to import controls, import aluminum controls, and there's compulsory reporting from importers. There's a great deal of visibility with our system almost in real time. It takes about just 24 hours to get access to the data. So, for example, we're very vigilant in our industrial sector. And up until now, we're very satisfied with the measures that have been implemented by Canada. But having said that, it's a very fluid market. It's a metal that has a really high value in the North American market. It's certainly the most interesting one in the world when it comes to exporting aluminium. So we're not sheltered from this type of attempt. It's important to remain vigilant and continue to work, as we've done, hand in hand, the industry and the government, maintain contacts so that we can raise any anomaly that may possibly lead to some sort of crisis situation. So apparently I've just got 30 seconds, so we'll be brief. So we know that aluminum produced in North America is one of the cleanest one. The carbon emissions for a tonne of aluminum has really gone down. It was almost 50% in 2011, and it's really gone down. We know that it's essential for the green transition, for road transport, for electricity, and for packaging and construction, just to cite a few examples. Can you talk about the advantages of Quebec aluminum compared to aluminum that's produced elsewhere in the world, and how can we do even better in supporting the sector?
We're at time.
Très rapidement.
Very quickly, we produce responsibly. We've got about the lowest carbon footprint in the world in terms of aluminum production. In the agreements to come up when it comes to adjustment mechanisms or border adjustment carbon mechanisms, we have to make sure that our metal within the parameters that are going to be decreed actually are given their right place. We want to be able to monetize the carbon value. That's not the case for the moment. And finally, and I'll round off with that, Mr. Chair, we have to ensure that we can continue to accompany the development and the deployment of the technology so that we're down to zero carbon instead of 6, so that once again we can be a world leader when it comes to electrolysis techniques.
We'll go to Ms. Blaney for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. And just quickly, I want to say that interpretation was amazing. And every once in a while, you know, I just am so used to listening to it. And then I hear it clearly, and I just am amazed. So thank you to the interpreters for their amazing skills, because I could not do it. So I am going to come back to Mr. Deeth again. You know, one of the things that I'm reflecting on in terms of your presentation to us is the fact that we are in a market globally that has a lot of countries with different environmental and labor laws. And we know that as we look at Canada specifically, we want to find a way to sort of build up that economy and see some growth, especially when it comes to the green economy and the great need that we have for that, both in terms of labor, but also in terms of the environment. So I'm just wondering, do you feel that Canada should require trading partners to meet our higher standards for the environment, labor protections, and health and safety when we have trade agreements? And how could we sort of have an opportunity to celebrate the good things that Canada does, especially in terms of these very issues to promote our goods?
Yes, I do think that Canada should hold the should hold non-domestic producers to the same standards that we hold ourselves. One of the reasons that we have monopolistic markets, such as what China holds in terms of battery minerals right now, is because the standards are so much lower. So there's both the human aspect of this. There's a lot of pointless human suffering that goes on because of lax standards around the world, but also from a practical competitive perspective, we're expected to compete on an unfair playing field.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess my next part is around the fact that as we are trying to grow that green economy and look at our transition and our sustainable future, how do we talk about what Canada can bring, and how do we provide the stability to those businesses so that we can grow that market internally and externally?
Well, as a general matter, I would say that we want to bring plenty of incentives for an ecosystem to develop domestically, and I think we have to get serious about sourcing sourcing our supplies, and if necessary, actually using what they call border pricing for, differentiating between quote clean and quote unclean sources of materials. Actually make up for the difference where we perceive it to be unfair and untenable from a long-term environmental standpoint or from a social perspective for workers, etc. So yeah.
Thanks. That's time. We'll now turn to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for being here this afternoon. I'm going to begin with the Canadian Trucking Alliance. Mr. Laskowski, thank you for your presentation and providing your 7 recommendations, which you shared with the government in February and with us today. I'm interested in your comments on the whole CBSA, the sufferance warehouse aspect, as well as CFIA inspections and the notion, as opposed to regular border crossings on commercial aspects, I guess CFIA only works on a 9 to 5. And if you can explain to me that a little bit further, it seems to me that sometimes when we look at supply chains, government itself can be the obstacle. And if we can work to eliminate that and make sure government is in the facilitation of trade, not hindering it, I was just wondering if you could provide some comments, please.
Sure. Thanks for the questions. So I'll start with the sufferance warehouses. As I mentioned earlier in the opening comments, in essence, what these sufferance warehouses allow the supply chain and the trucking industry that's moving those supply chain is to, instead of clearing loads at the border, which sometimes can be very congested, which actually, going back to the Gordie Howe Bridge, now you'll have what's referred to in our industry as the secondary. So if you don't clear, the truck has to go for inspection into secondary. And some of those secondaries can be very crowded. And so what a sufferance warehouse does is it allows the carrier and the customer to potentially clear inland into a secure area with Canadian Customs present there. Obviously, that requires investments, and it also requires technology and secure yards, all of it. And so that has been the request to bring these sufferance warehouses back in greater numbers. And I'm overly simplifying like everything, but it requires investments. And as we see currently going on when we have labor disruptions like at marine ports and all the rest of it, the same thing could apply. You could bring those containers out and bring them to the sufferance warehouse yards and clear them in those yards. So the ask of CBSA and through budgets is to increase the spending here, both in technology and in labor, because you need someone physically at those yards. With regards to CFIA and USDA and the rest of it, as mentioned earlier, the border is 24/7, and trucks clear that 24/7. When it goes to agriculture and FDA, in particular in the United States, they are not there 24/7. And it's much to their chagrin as well. I mean, these are their customers that we're moving as well. And so a long-standing request is to correct this. And, we're always amazed as an industry. We spend billions of dollars on both sides of the country to make trade work. And, I'm always accused by some folks of overly simplifying, but we're talking about a few people here, folks, not billions of dollars. And that needs to happen because, in essence, what happens, once those people leave, you are shut down. And when it comes to food and produce, that product cannot move inland. It needs to stay because we have health and safety rules and food security rules. Because if there is a recall, everything needs to be traced. So those trucks wait, and sometimes they wait for hours, and sometimes they wait for days, just for someone to come back to work.
And that's what I want to follow up on, your chairman, the notion of waiting. At our last committee hearing, we had the general manager of the Fort Erie and the Buffalo Peace Bridge Authority, and he mentioned an upcoming piece of U.S. legislation, the Securing Port Act, where all U.S.-bound commercial vehicles will now need to be scanned. they've got an innovative solution that they're working with the Customs and Border Patrol. The Americans are investing $20 million. They're putting that scanning equipment on the Canadian side so that it's scanned by the time the commercial vehicle crosses the bridge. All the information is settled, and so they get a go or no go at the customs booth. I'm just wondering, has the government worked with the Canadian Trucking Alliance on this? I mean, are we seeing this at the Gordie Howe Bridge, for example?
So the answer is yes. We've worked both as Canadian Trucking Alliance and the Ontario Trucking Association with the Peace Bridge and the authorities there, and that is the goal. That this technology, because in essence, what everyone wants, both the Americans and the Canadians, the trucking industry and our supply chain partners, is to have a secure border and secure trade. But with technology, we can do it better and faster, and that's what this project is all about.
That's your time, Mr. Baldinelli. Apologize. We'll now turn to Mr. Meow for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. A common theme that we have seen in discussion of Canadian growth and productivity is that Canadian businesses are incredibly innovative, but seems to hit a bit of a glass ceiling in terms of scaling up and expanding. So for CFIB, do you have any thoughts that you can share with the committee on how access to international market can assist in the scaling up process?
Yeah, actually, the survey we did in January asked questions around how export can help grow businesses, and we did find that a majority of businesses are seeking for international opportunities to help grow their business. I do have the deck here, and I'd be happy to circulate that information with you afterwards in terms of the exact data, but that is certainly one of the findings from that survey, was that businesses are seeking for other markets. However, there is a significant proportion of those businesses in Canada that are very happy with the domestic demand as well.
And what more can be done to give Canadian companies or small businesses the tools they need to scale up and compete at the international level?
Yeah, I think it can come back to a lot of the comments made by Jasmine about the cost of doing business. There's a lot of cost right now and regulatory burden on small businesses, which impacts their day-to-day operations. So the idea of looking into custom procedures just adds another task, right? I know we commented on the Trade Commissioner services earlier, but they're certainly a service that we've promoted amongst our membership, but unfortunately they go underutilized for SMEs.
And what about helping small, mid-sized business to diversify their export market, also the range of goods and services that they can export?
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at that by industry, right? Certain services and goods are not exportable, but what we're seeing is fairly common across the industry. It's the agricultural businesses that are looking for other markets and looking to expand. It's the wholesale, it's the manufacturing, right? So obviously targeting some of that communication is helpful.
And are your members benefiting from the Indo-Pacific strategies that our government launched in relation to opening more new markets or new relationship with countries in that region?
That's a good question. We do have some data in terms of where small businesses are exporting to. I mean, the top exporting market is the U.S. because of their proximity. I can certainly share the slides with you following this, and you can take a look, but that number in Canada is quite small in terms of the Asian Indo-Pacific markets.
Great. Please do share with the committee.
I'd be happy to come see you, yeah.
And the next question I would like to direct to Ms. Smith from the Railroad Association of Canada. And throughout this study, we have heard witnesses sharing the importance of climate-resilient supply chain and diversification. Could you please share your perspective on this with the committee?
Certainly, be pleased to. So railroads are 4 times more fuel efficient than trucks, generating significantly less greenhouse gases than trucks, both for passenger and for freight. So the greenest mode of transport. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of efforts that have been done, and in fact, the RAC recently signed an MOU with Transport Canada on emission reduction. So very exciting work to be done there in the next few years. But things like alternative propulsion, alternative fuel, even battery and electrification throughout the passenger rail sector is also very interesting innovations and exciting times to come in terms of being more sustainable.
And I know in this February, our federal government have provided a joint funding of $60 million to the Arctic Gateway Group to finish the work on the Hudson's Bay Railway and redevelop the port of Churchill. Could you please share with this committee the significance of the Hudson's Bay Railway and the port of Churchill to the northern Canada and Prairie provinces?
I don't have exact data on Churchill in particular, but for shippers, as I'm sure my fellow panelists would attest, it's all about options. And so to have another way for product to reach global markets is important. And to have funding that allows a short line to be able to finish that work would be critical for them to assure, again, their planning and their ability to proceed into their further into their planning process, their strategic planning process.
That's time. So, members of the committee, it's 5 o'clock, but if we do a third round, we'll finish at about 25 after 5. So I'm going to suggest that we do a third round. And for the Conservatives, actually, I'm going to take the round, but I'll make sure the clerk is looking at the clock so I don't give myself too much extra time. I want to quickly go back to the sufferance warehouses because I met with the Maritime Group recently, and they said, in fact, they're being told that their sufferance warehouses might not be renewed by CBSA. So not only do we need more sufferance warehouses because they speed the flow of traffic, we might actually lose the ones we have. So I just thought I'd quickly ask, how devastating do you think it would be to the Canadian economy if CBSA said, we don't have the budget to actually come and do the work at these existing sufferance warehouses? What would that effect have on the Canadian economy?
Well, I guess my message would be find it in the budget. There is, I think you need to look at sufferance warehouses as an investment, and it's hard infrastructure, sort of, because it's one could spin it as a private-public partnership. Those sufferance warehouses are private money that's set up to clear inland to assist in the movement of the supply chain. It's some similar messaging about the struggles with budgets, and they're real. We encourage the minister and through the budgetary process to find that money. It is not a deal maker when it comes to the overall scheme in a budget.
Thanks very much. I want to quickly turn to infrastructure investments. So one of the things I've talked about the committee is Canada used to have ranked 14th in the world by the World Economic Forum in infrastructure. We've fallen to 27th. Over that same period of time, the U.S. has gone from 18th up to 10th and then fell to 12th. But U.S. Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg said their fall from 10th to 12th is such a big problem for their infrastructure for transport. In Canada, we've gone from, in 2013, 2014, from 14th to 27th. So we have a massive lack of infrastructure happening in this country right now, and we're a trading nation. Some of that infrastructure obviously could be rail infrastructure or other things done by private companies. So what do you need from the government to make the necessary investments into infrastructure so that we stop this incredible decline that we're seeing in our transport infrastructure, which is critical for trade? I thought I'd ask the Railroad Association perhaps first, and if the CFIB wants to comment on that.
It is what moves supply chains. It's what we need instead of prescriptive regulation. Investment in supply chains, too, needs to be looked at as a whole. Rail is one link, but indeed being able to invest and have a better policy regulatory framework that encourages investment would enable everybody in the supply chain.
Specific policy, though, that would create the environment so that our rail companies would say we want to make massive investments to expand rail across the country to move goods faster. Is there a specific recommendation you'd have for that?
Well, the example that I used in my opening remarks, interswitching needs to be repealed. So back when it was used in 2014 to 2017, there was indication that investment at that time was chilled. And when the policy was repealed in 2017, investment rebounded by the railroads. So 21.5 billion in the last decade of private money into that network is significant. And so that's what we would recommend, is to repeal that policy to encourage investment.
CFIB, do you have any comments on that?
Very quickly, it's important to encourage investment in rail, road, and ports because small businesses in Canada use those critical infrastructure to send their goods to markets and to receive their goods. So it's quite important that we have a fluid supply chain infrastructure in the country.
So I want to quickly go back to and critical minerals. So one of the other problems in Canada is we don't get projects approved fast enough, so they just the supply ends up going somewhere else. So I just thought maybe you could comment on when it's done in Canada, how important is it because it's done at the lower greenhouse gas emissions, per ton or per kilogram, however, great environmental standards, great labor standards. Like, how important is it that we do these projects in Canada as opposed to relying on these projects in other countries due to their environmental and human rights, et cetera, records?
Well, the importance is that it's a lot easier to build a value-added ecosystem in Canada if it has its own secure source of supply here in Canada, or at least in countries friendly with Canada. As far as the North American scene goes, there are 0 graphite mines in the United States currently. There's only one operating one in Canada, and it's kind of on the downslide. So, this is there's a whole vacuum here. In terms of, if I understood your question regarding permitting, I don't actually perceive that the issues around speed of permitting are particularly holding us up. Certainly, that is an issue in the United States for certain. A little bit less so in Canada. The real issue, I think, is the inability to attract capital to these projects.
And that's my time. So we'll now turn to Mr. Arya for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Simard of Aluminium Association Canada, what is the approximate installed production capacity of primary aluminium in Canada today?
3.2 million tons.
What was the installed capacity about 15, 20 years back in Canada? Say, if I say it was 3 million tons, am I close to the...
Approximately, yeah. We've been pretty stable.
So basically, during the last 15, 20 years, our installed capacity has fairly been the same. Next question, how much of aluminum exports from Canada goes to Indo-Pacific region?
It all depends how the dynamics of the markets, both in Asia.
Approximately, what is the percentage of the production capacity goes as export to Indo-Pacific region?
Must be pretty small these days because because China has taken over Asian markets.
Thank you. What is amongst the primary aluminum producers? What percentage of companies in Canada are owned by foreign entities?
They all are.
Okay. So if I say that,
stock market.
So if I say that because 100% of the companies in aluminum sector are foreign owned, and Canadian companies are just the branch offices of these multinational corporations, we are not adding capacity in Canada where we have talent, we have got the natural minerals, and we are not taking advantage of the free trade agreement we have been signing all over the world.
I'm sorry, I totally disagree with your statement.
Then tell me, what is the fact? The fact is that the installed capacity has not gone up in the last 15, 20 years. We have talent here, we have got technology here, and Canadian companies are all foreign owned. Because they're all foreign owned, we have just become the branch office to cater to the North American market.
I'm sorry, no, I don't. I totally disagree.
Tell me the facts then.
May I answer? Yes, the facts. We have invested over $15 billion in remodernization of the plants in Canada over that same period of time. Over that same period of time, the U.S. went from 14 smelters to 3. and Europe has gone down by 60%. Canada now produces 85% of all the metal produced in North America. It produces 45% of all the primary metal produced between Europe and North America. We have a dominant position. The industry has been reinvesting, has been spending in excess of $4 billion yearly in Canada in local spend. We've been exporting for $12 billion of metal, and we have been generating a lot of wealth locally in Canada.
Sorry, my time is limited. How many more workers have been employed in your members during the last 15, 20 years? How many more workers have been employed?
I don't understand the question.
So, okay, what is the number of people employed in primary aluminum production today compared
approximately 10,000. Approximately 10,000.
And what was the number of people employed about 15, 20 years back?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Mr. Deeth, I'm a big supporter of anything connected to minerals, to mines, to mobility strategy. I'm a big supporter of critical minerals exploration, battery manufacturing, or electrical vehicle manufacturing. I've been pressing that we should have the mineral processing also. So I've been a big vocal supporter, but I got problem with what you're saying. You're saying that there's a market problem that we are not getting, what did you say? The risk, there's no connection between the producers and the suppliers, and your suggestion seems to be that the taxpayers take the risk so that your industry can benefit. That's what means the critical mineral stabilization reserve means, correct?
No, what I suggest is that the only role for the taxpayers is to help up to establish and then to administer essentially a buffer stock system, which actually the mechanism of it would typically buy more when prices are low and sell more when prices are high, so that it will actually make money. So
no, I'm sorry. Government making money in the market mechanism is unheard of. It's always the private sector win out. I don't mind private sectors making money. And Canada, we always claimed we are the mining capital of the world. If we can't generate capital for the critical mining companies in Canada, then where else? Who else can?
China has dedicated enormous amounts of capital toward mining projects, and this is part of how they've become dominant in so many minerals. They have been proactive in taking control of resources, not only within China but outside.
China is dominant. They control 70 to 90% of mineral processing, and they have acquired mines across the world. I do understand that. That's the reason why we are providing incentives for the companies to come up in every single point of the value chain, from mines, we are giving investment tax credit, to the battery manufacturers. We are providing.
I'm gonna have to interrupt. We're 40 seconds over. I gave a little bit of latitude to so we'll now move to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Oui, là, je vais me tourner vers la fédération.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the CFIB and the two representatives. I know that recently you carried out a survey amongst your members, and you presented the main conclusions of that recently. So it's officially that it's deferred to the fall. Are you satisfied with the decision that's been taken on this? Yes. There's lots of other implications with the portal. We would like to have more flexibility for small SMEs. But what it brings to the SMEs is that now we've got more time to educate them about the different functions on this portal. I think now we've got a bit more time to work with the agency, the CBSE, to educate them about the CARM portal. And within this CARM client portal, there's lots of other concerns that we have as well, but perhaps that's for another day and another conversation. Yes, we've taken good note of that. Thank you. What about the collaboration, the communication with the agency since you started working on this? Well, communication could be improved, perhaps. The documents that come out just come out a few days beforehand, and it's not in plain language for Canadian business owners. And there's lots of changes. there's continually changes coming up. And then that adds more confusion to the situation. Do you have confidence that the SMEs are going to be ready for the launch in October? Well, we hope so, is the answer. We're doing our utmost to try and educate our members about the portal and make sure that they sign up for this. We had a webinar about how to register, how to sign up. We did that last week, and no doubt we'll do another one during the summer so that the names of the businesses actually increases on the portal. So you wouldn't really have been ready for the 13th of May, or your members wouldn't have been ready. Well, on the 13th of May, there were 25% of our members who were already registered on the portal because they are carrying out imports. Well, I'd just like to say that we've got lots of resources on our website that can help SMEs to better navigate through this labyrinth. I presume I don't have any more time. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
We'll now turn to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to go to the Railway Association.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. I forgot. It's Ms. Blaney for 2.5 minutes. I apologize.
I know I'm new, but hopefully I don't get forgotten. So I'm going to come back again to Mr. Deeth. It was an interesting exchange that happened there, and I just want to sort of clarify a few things that I think I want to make sure I understand. So it sounds like the work that you did was 17 years. And so can you please explain, like, it seems to me like we can talk about the minerals across Canada, but there's something not working in our system if those opportunities are not coming to fruition. So if you could just talk about what you see the gaps as, and when it comes to capital, what is the blockage to having that capital engaged?
Right. Where capital tends to fall short is the stage that is very capital intensive, which is the construction and ramping up of a new mining project, and that there are, as it has been pointed out, plenty of various incentive programs and things to find minerals and that sort of thing. But we are generally lacking in programs that would that help companies make that large capital leap, and typically that's where mine investment firms come in, or when they're desperate, the supply chain itself will help to capitalize projects in order to get the materials they need. This is not happening in the battery space right now. And I think the main reason is this combination of an existing alternative with a China-centric supply chain and the risks attendant with for end users to be taking risk on individual projects, and then in turn for individual projects who have to hope that they can find a buyer that will actually live up to those contracts at the end of the day. So really what I'm advocating for is a way to eliminate a lot of those frictions that get in the way of capital being deployed for this purpose.
And so in terms of that, what I hear a lot, and it was mentioned earlier, is that we have multinational companies come into Canada, they make the purchases, and we have a branch of Canadians working instead of having that ownership. Can you explain what the difference is between having multinationals keep coming into our communities and actually having local people owning a project that's benefiting the whole region?
Well, I think it's reasonably safe to say that that large multinationals have less of a common interest with our nation than actual sort of domestic local ownership would have. Having said that, I suppose there's nothing evil with multinational ownership per se. But I think preferable, if we can get it, is more domestic ownership and participation.
Thanks very much. And now we'll go to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'm going to be going to Ms. Smith with the Railway Association of Canada. Trade is critically important in my constituency in the Niagara region. So I was just wondering, could you put a number figure on the scale of trade that would be impacted if CN, CP are both shut down in this potential labor disruption that's being discussed? And, for example, what's going to be the impact on passenger rail service?
Certainly. The impending dispute is of grave concern. CN and CP are negotiating. They're in the mediation period, and it involves 9,000 conductors and locomotive engineers across Canada. In addition, at CPKC, it involves 80 rail traffic controllers. That's where the passenger rail gets affected. So the rail traffic controllers, if they are on a labor dispute, the passenger lines that travel on CP's lines will not be able to. This will focus on mainly Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. So when Sorry, go ahead.
Would that also impact, say, for example, in the GT, in the Golden Horseshoe area, for example, Metrolinx, Go Transit, Amtrak trains that cross in Niagara Falls to go to Toronto? Would those also be impacted?
If that is CP land, if that's CP territory or tracks, yes, it would be impacted. Metrolinx does own a portion of their own trackage, but anything that would follow on CP's tracks would affect.
Being the shadow critic for tourism, how about the Rocky Mountaineer? Would that be impacted as well? We're looking at a tourism operation that is struggling to come back because of the COVID and the pandemic, and then the forest fires that had occurred. So that would be impacted as well.
Yes, in fact, we had Rocky Mountain in town yesterday, and part of today they attended our committee meetings, our AGM, and our shortline conference. So we had great conversations there, gravely concerned. Their busy season starts around May 20th, which is exactly when the labor unions will have the ability to strike as of the 22nd of May.
Thank you. Mr. Laskowski, I'll go to you in that whole aspect of labor disruptions. As you're aware, CBSA employees are in the midst of undertaking their strike votes by the end of next week. And they're negotiating a contract, which is the previous contract. By the time they conclude it, it'll end in 2025, and we'll have to be at this all over again. The last time there were labor disruptions, there were slowdowns at the border. We were talking about 5-hour slowdowns at border crossings in Niagara. Can you tell us the experience that the Trucking Association had?
Well, during labor disruptions with CBSA, the border delays, which can be spotty at times and flowing at times, become a permanent feature. So, in short, it ends to a lot of frustration on the part of drivers, companies, and the supply chain, and added cost for everyone.
Chair, how much time do I have?
And 20.
I just want to ask the Canadian Wood Pallet and Container Association, Mr. Jeffros, you had talked about the relationship or partnership that you had with CFIA. Is that correct? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Under international rule, the ISPM 15 program, which I alluded to, national plant protection organizations of signatory countries need to have domestic programs in place to ensure the phytosanitary standards of the wood packaging that moves in trade around the world. About 20 years ago, our organization entered into a contract with two other Canadian organizations with the CFIA to oversee the inspection portion of this in Canada. So we now have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 470 clients across the country that are engaged in manufacturing wood packaging for export, and our role as an arm of the CFIA, or acting as an arm of the CFIA, is to ensure that there are quality and processing standards in place that ensure a chain of custody of the wood material back to the source of the heat treatment, which renders that wood safe to make these certified pallets out of. So ultimately, this entire process ensures that wood packaging is there to be used to move products. It keeps it as the conveyance of choice.
Thank you.
That's it. And we'll go to Mr. Sidhu now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think when you talk about trade corridors and supply chains, our government recognizes that efficient supply chains are important to this country. It's important for growth and allowing businesses to reach global markets, which is why we invested over $4 billion in close to 130 projects across the country. Now, we heard many recommendations from the members here today, but if you can just pick one key priority what would it be in terms of supply chain bottlenecks? Maybe we can start from the right of the table, my right, and move to the left.
I guess I'm the most right. It would be the repealing of interswitching that was tried before. It failed. It led to a chill on investment. We want to invest more. We want to sustainably grow and support our customers.
I think back to the last question about the phytosanitary standards. When I think about wood packaging, to me, I think that is the most pressing thing, that we need to make sure that our domestic program here is operating in a manner whereby we're moving safe product around the world. We do not have pest interceptions at our foreign borders, which will then impact the ability for our exporters to utilize our products. So I think that we need to really be very dedicated here in Canada to ensure that our domestic Canadian heat-treated wood products program is well funded and is operating soundly.
From the point of view of our member, we want to ensure that those critical infrastructures are available at all times to ensure goods can be sent and received at any time. So that would be our most number one recommendation. Okay.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it comes down to whether it's the newly formed supply chain office or CBSA, that priorities in budget spending be put to efficiency and trade issues. That too often things come down to money, and that's life, right? Except these are all investments. And we all say around this committee and from industry and from the politicians that we are a trading nation. We are a trading nation because our forefathers made investments in all these things. We cannot lose sight of that. And so we need to continue to invest and pound the table around this table when it comes budget time for both departments and the overall federal budget, that when it comes to foreign trade, international and domestic, we make that a priority, and then afterwards we can decide what gets spent on.
In terms of bottlenecks, I believe that actually it's interprovincial trade barriers and inconsistencies in regulatory policies across the different regions. I think that's probably the biggest barrier to supply chain efficiency.
If we can go online.
On our part, ensure the unhindered flow of goods between Canada and the U.S. These goods are essential for a lot of reasons, and they keep people working all around the country. So we have to make sure that we lessen the burden, administrative burden, and at the same time protect the access to markets without undue occupation or stoppage of the infrastructure.
Oh, thank you for that. And Mr. Deeth, you mentioned capital and Canada and critical minerals. And a few weeks ago, I was in the Yukon in Whitehorse, and we came across many country representatives there talking about capital, investors in their country wanting to come to Canada, investing in this important space, because we're building out an EV supply chain ecosystem, as you know. There's billions of dollars investments coming to this country. A couple weeks ago, we had Toyota announce a $15 billion, Honda announced a $15 billion announcement from Japan, building out 4 plants, 4,000 more jobs coming to our country. And Canada is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has every component that can go into a battery. And so many countries globally are interested in what we have here. When you talk about capital, where do you see, which countries do you see the most interest from?
So the capital intensity has been actually reasonably good at the level of what we might call the downstream building of plants, and some of the sort of the midstream manufacturing facilities that feed those plants. By the time you get 2 or 3 steps up the supply chain to where the minerals actually come out of the ground, that's where there has been a severe lack of capital. Personally, I think it's going to bite us because it takes a long time for a mineral project to get going, and it's a lot shorter to build a battery plant than it is to build a mine. So we're going to be building battery plants and then have nothing to feed them. As far as interest from other countries are concerned, my experience actually was that we had the most serious interest from Chinese investors. And that only lasted a certain amount of time. But I would say that's been, those are some of the, I hate to say that they were sort of the leading interest in investing in mining projects in Canada, but I suppose they had the experience and decided that it made sense for them to continue doing it. A lot of these minerals have no huge player, such as might exist in gold or copper production or something like that. And there's really no giant source of international, multinational capital that is likely to come in and start the ball rolling as far as these things are concerned. So if you want to talk about why there's a bit of a vacuum capital, those are some of the contributing factors.
And I think that's definitely time. So, I mean, I'm having so much fun, and we could do another round and go till 6. But I suggest I'm not going to see the will in the room. So, just a couple of reminders for the committee. May 21st, the committee will begin the CIIT import study, saying we'll continue it on the 23rd. A final reminder: the witness deadline is for that study is Tuesday, May the 14th at noon. Thanks to all our witnesses today for coming today. You provide us with a lot of valuable information. And with that, I am going to adjourn the meeting.